Joining Commissioner Michael Yaki. All right, and I now show the top of the hour. Would you like to go ahead and get started at this time?
We will get started in just a minute.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes. Hello.
Yes, are we ready to get started?
Hi. Catherine? Catherine, we ready? Yes, we're ready.
All right, and here we go.
Thank you.
Great. This meeting of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights comes to order at 10:01 a.m. on August 17, 2018. The meeting takes place at the Commission's headquarters, located at 1331 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest, Washington, D.C. I'm Chair Catherine Lehman. Commissioners who are present at this meeting in addition to me are Commissioner Harriet and Commissioner Narasaki. On the phone, if you could confirm you are on the line after I say your name. I believe we have Vice Chair Timmons Goodson,
Yes.
Commissioner Degbele,
Present.
Commissioner Kursanow,
Here.
Commissioner Chladni,
Here.
and Commissioner Yaki.
Aye.
Thank you. A quorum of the commissioners is present. Is the court reporter present? Thank you. Is the staff director present?
I am on the phone, yes.
Thank you. The meeting now comes to order. Before we proceed with the agenda and our formal business today, I want to take a moment to address the passing of two individuals. First, Dr. Dawn Mabalan, who was a professor of history at San Francisco State University until her tragic death a few weeks ago. The commission had invited Dr. Mabalan to speak today in recognition of her expertise as an accomplished scholar of Filipino-American history. I regret that we did not have the opportunity to hear from her. Her work to preserve and spread the stories of early Filipino-Americans helped to enrich and deepen our country's understanding of the American experience. Those contributions will continue to live on as more students of history and civil rights read her work. I understand that Commissioner Narasaki would also like to say a few words.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to add my deepest condolences to the family and the friends of Dr. Dawn Mabalan. Since learning of her passing last week, I've heard an outpouring of grief from the Filipino-American community about what a tremendous loss this is to them and to our nation. She was an inspiration to many across the nation. In her book, Little Manila is in the Heart, Dawn chronicles the settlement and creation of Little Manila in Stockton, California in the early 20th century. She said she sought to rewrite the dominant narrative of Asian American history, which has downplayed the Filipino American community building. The title of her book derives from a seminal Asian American novel, America's in the Heart, by the late poet, author, and activist Carlos Bulosan. Dawn believed that early Filipino-American immigrants' deep faith in America sustained them through decades of sacrifice and poverty, racial violence, denials of right to immigrate, become citizens, and to marry whom they wish, and labor repression. Her documentation of the stories of early Filipino immigrants are important because Filipino-Americans have played a critical but largely forgotten role in American history. I was very much looking forward to hearing her share this history, and I hope the Commission will be able to revisit this topic in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I want to address the passing of a member of the Commission's Georgia Advisory Committee, Justin Presley. Justin had served as a member of the Georgia State Advisory Committee since 2011, serving for the last 7 years. Justin was clearly dedicated, personally and professionally, to the disability rights movement and ensuring independent and integrated space for people with disabilities. His years of service benefited all of us, and we are grateful for the time and energy he devoted to this civil rights cause and so many others. The Commission sends our condolences to the families of Justin Presley and Dr. Dawn Mabalan. Approval of our agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda for this business meeting?
I so move.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second. Thank you. I'll start with a couple amendments. I move to amend to take down the discussions and votes on program planning for FY 2019 and 2020, as well as the presentation for Dr. Mabalan. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you. Any other amendments?
Commissioner Chair, I have a Commissioner Yaki.
Go ahead, Commissioner Yaki.
Yes, Madam Chair, I have moved to amend the agenda to include a discussion and vote on the Stand Your Ground report.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you. Any other amendments? If there are no further amendments, let's vote to approve the agenda as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes unanimously. We'll hear now from our main advisory committee chair, Diane Keel, on the committee's recently released report, Voting Rights in Maine. Chair Keel, you have 10 minutes to present to us.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Thank you for highlighting the advisory committee's voting rights and information.
Chair Keel, I'm sorry, you're breaking
First, I
up.
would like
Chair Keel, you're breaking up. Why don't we go to our other presenter at the moment and see if we can find a better line for you?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So next we'll hear a presentation from our Arizona Advisory Committee Chair, Lorena Van Asch, on the committee's recently released advisory memorandum, Voting Rights in Arizona. Chair Van Asch, are you available?
I am. Good morning, Chairperson.
Good morning.
Arizona this year took upon to examine potential barriers to voting that may have a discriminatory impact on voters based on race, color, sex, disability status, and national origin. And its intent was to supplement the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights 2018 statutory enforcement report. We gathered information from a public meeting that we held earlier this year on March 9th, and held in Phoenix, and testimony that was submitted to the committee in writing, as well as testimony that was received during the January 11, 2018 meeting of the Native American Voting Rights Coalition. We submitted a memo, and our memo, of course, that you have, and I know you have read, has focused on 4 areas: potential barriers to voting in the areas of language access, bifurcated voter registration system, voter ID law, and restriction on mail-in ballots. We also took a look at the impact of Shelby County v. Holder decision, specifically regarding access to polling locations. And the findings that we found with regard to the impact of Shelby with polling locations were quite interesting. Arizona, after the 2016 election, made national headlines for having very long lines. And one of the reasons for that was that Arizona had closed over 70% of its voting locations compared to the prior 2012 election. Those closures were justified by voting by the Maricopa, then this is in Maricopa County. I'm sorry if I said Arizona, it was Maricopa County. Maricopa County elections director advised, or county recorder, I'm sorry, advised that the reason for that was that there had been a decline in interest in voting in person given the mail-in voting ballots that are available in Maricopa County, the cost of maintaining those polling locations, and the lack of interest of poll workers at those locations. But what we heard from the community is specifically the voters with disabilities were that those lines were especially impactful for them because many of them rely on what we call in Arizona dial a ride, so public assistance rides, and those rides will not wait for their riders for an indefinite amount of time. So a lot of these voters with disabilities would go to these locations that had excessive lines and had to leave because they didn't have the time to stand and wait in those lines. The voters with disabilities also made a significant showing at our public hearing on March 9th and expressed a concern with the lack of the poll workers' knowledge of the voting machines. A lot of the poll workers didn't know how to turn on the machines, didn't know what features they had for the voters with disabilities. And so the voters with disabilities had many times, if they couldn't wait for the poll workers to figure out how to turn on the machine or how to give them the access to the voting machine, they would have to just leave. The Shelby County case also had an impact on language access. There are counties in Arizona that lost 203 coverage, but one of the positive findings that we heard at our meeting is that despite not receiving that coverage, they continue to receive language access. And the voter experts encourage these communities, and specifically in Arizona, we have a lot of Native Americans who have language other than English, but they are encouraged to maintain collaboration with county officials. And even though these certain counties weren't required to have language access, they continued to do so during the 2016 election. So that was a very positive finding for us. The other impact that Shelby V County had in Arizona, which is very significant and is subject of ongoing litigation, is the ballot collection law. So in Arizona, after Shelby V County, Arizona voters passed a law that made it a felony for individuals to collect and turn in another's ballots. And this had an impact on voters, especially in counties with a lot of Native Americans who are very far away from their polling location, and who, based on testimony, would rely on friends or other organizations that would collect their completed ballots and turn it in for them. In March of 2016, before the election, Arizona voters made it a felony for individuals to collect and turn in another's ballots. And they excluded, however, household members, family members, or caregivers. The groups filed for an injunction to prevent the ban from going into effect before the election. The district court in Arizona did not grant the injunction. The Ninth Circuit granted it and found that it was unlikely that the Justice Department would have granted those pre-clearances had the protections of Shelby County been in effect. However, just recently, in May of this year, the Arizona District Court issued an order upholding the ban on collections, and in doing so, it had surveyed voters affected by the ban and concluded that the law did not have a sufficiently negative impact on voters statewide to raise sufficient concerns. That is an issue. Immediately, it was appealed, so it is up for appeal. But those are really the three significant impacts that we found based on the testimony, written testimony, and the Native American hearing that was held on how Shelby County Beholder impacted Arizona. In addition to that, one of the issues that we also took testimony on and looked at was Arizona's bifurcated voter ID laws. Arizona in 2004 approved what is called Proposition 200, and what that sought to do is to require proof of citizenship for all voter registration forms. The U.S. Supreme Court in 2016 denied that requirement, and so what Arizona did as a result is it created a dual registration system so that voters could register for the federal elections, did not require at the time of registration a proof of citizenship, but if they wanted to register to vote in the state of Arizona, proof of citizenship was required. And what we found was that this dual bifurcated system has created a lot of confusion with voters who believe that they are registering to vote for all elections, and come to find out they only register to vote for the federal election and not for the Arizona statewide elections. That law also was subject to litigation in a lawsuit that was initiated in November 2017. That law also recently settled, and it settled after our report was submitted. So that the settlement is not contained in the report, but the lawsuit that was referenced in the report is at footnote 47. And we, as a committee, did not have an opportunity to review that, of course, but I did want to raise that update to the commission. The recommendations that we received from the county reporter in response to the concerns about long wait lines was that Maricopa County, and again, this is Maricopa County, which is the largest county in Arizona, that had those headline-making 5-hour wait lines. The suggestion that, or recommendations that they made, is that Maricopa County move to vote center models where instead of going to a mandatory polling location, voters would be allowed to go to the location of their choice. There are 2 counties in Arizona where we have that out of the 15 counties, and that is a move that the county recorder believes would remedy a lot of the issues of voters being turned away because they went to the wrong voting location, and also that would remedy the long wait lines that we saw in 2016.
Ms. Van Asch, thank you so much for your presentation about the report. I want to open up for, about the advisory memorandum. I'd like to open it up for questions and comments from my fellow commissioners. Commissioner Arasaki?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the Arizona State Advisory Committee and the Chair for doing this extensive report. Arizona has been sort of ground zero in the Southwest for issues around voting. I was very interested because Arizona does have such a significant Native American population and the findings around that community. And one of them struck me that Native American voters reported that when they went to the polls to vote, they learned that they were dropped from registration rolls but had received no notification explaining the reason for being dropped. And then they were unable to vote because of the deadline for registration is 30 days prior to the election day. Do you know whether the state is doing anything to look into that problem? And I know some of it is often caused because of the remoteness of Native American reservations and the issues they have with being able to receive mail.
Yes, you highlighted a number of issues that our Native American community has, but to answer your question, I don't know what remedies are being placed to so that doesn't happen again. I believe that information was gathered from the Native American meeting that was held in January. So although we do have a transcript, it wasn't at our public meeting. But you did highlight 2 things that they have that the Native American community has unique issues with, and those are addresses on the forms. The forms that we have in Arizona require a physical address form, and the addresses that Native American communities have don't necessarily comply with the traditional address that we would see on other forms, and so they struggle with providing an address that the county officials find in compliance. And so that I know is an issue that has been raised, and it was raised at our public meeting. Unfortunately, I don't know what is being done to address that. The other item that I think you addressed is language access, and Arizona is unique in that it has multiple Native American communities that have a language other than English, and so although not required, it has, based on the testimony we received, it appears that county officials are still working with providing language in their native language so that they have help in registering to vote and in actually voting.
I note that also your report highlighted the fact that under the National Voter Registration Act, states are required to provide registration opportunities at the DMV and also at the state agencies. And it seems that Native Americans also were not being asked 100% of the time at either place to register. So I was also interested in whether there's any follow-up on that issue.
Yes, that was something that we found. And as far as follow-up, I don't know beyond highlighting that was a concern and something that did happen. I don't know what is being done to remedy that also.
Great. And I just have one final question. In your recommendations, you asked our commission to send this advisory memo and make recommendations to DOJ. And one of them says appropriate the nearly $320 million already allocated to counties to election assistance. And I'm wondering, I'm not quite sure what that means. Does that mean that the state has $320 million that it's sitting on?
That was a recommendation that we heard from a county recorder in response to the lack of or the aging of the voting machines. And so what he advised us is that there was this $320 million allocated to counties. I believe that's a federal amount. I don't think that that's money that we're sitting on in the state, but I'm not exactly sure.
Okay, if you could get clarification since you're asking us to
Absolutely.
Approach DOJ, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Questions from
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from other commissioners? While waiting, I will say, Chair Van Asch, I really appreciated the.
Madam Chair.
I'll just finish my thought and then come to you next, Commissioner Degwele. Perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
Chair Van Asch, I really appreciated the inclusion of the bright spot about language access in the report and also in your presentation. It was really exciting to read and to hear that multiple counties in Arizona are continuing to provide language access supports, even though during the 2016 elections they did not meet the federal Section 203 covered language criteria. So that was an unusual bright spot and certainly very pleasant to get to read. I also wanted to ask you, in the recommendations for the advisory memorandum, you suggest that the Arizona State Legislature eliminate the requirement that felons pay fines and fees in order to restore their voting rights. And I wondered if my fellow commissioners would have any objection to our attaching the Commission's fines and fees report when we send your recommendations to the Arizona State Legislature. So just curious if any of my fellow commissioners have concerns about that.
Madam Chair, this is Vice Chair Timmons Goodson. I think that's a wonderful idea.
Thank you. Hearing no objection, I think we will do that. Commissioner Degwele?
Thank you. I want to join my fellow commissioners in thanking you for the fine work and for your report this morning. Please carry our thanks to the entire committee. I had a question about the reasons that the Maricopa registrar used or offered for eliminating polling places. So, yeah, I think you said that two of the reasons were that more voters preferred to mail in their ballots, and then another one was that there was a lack of interest in people serving as poll workers. Is that, or did I capture two of the reasons you offered?
Yes, those were two of the reasons I offered, and I know he offered more. If you'd like to hear, cost pressures associated with maintaining the locations and the voting equipment, and the less locations willing to serve as polling locations because of increased liability, lack of security, lack of compliance with the ADA, and insurance concerns.
And the reduction in polling places was, did you say was 70%?
Yes, it was 70% compared to the 2012 election, and it was 85% reduction compared to the 2008 election.
So I guess I have two questions. One is, what evidence did Maricopa County offer in support of these purported justifications for such a drastic reduction? And in particular, was there any evidence that the challenges in these areas had become drastically more in the course of the last 4 years than they had been previously?
The evidence that they provided was only their testimony, nothing in addition to that. And I'm sorry, your second question was what? Yeah,
so I guess to my mind, a 70% reduction in polling places in the most populous county, as you said, in the state, is a rather drastic change. in voting access. And so my thought is that there would have had to have been a rather precipitous and drastic change in the ability of the county to provide access to polling places that had any chance of backing up the purported justifications. And so I'm just wondering what type of studies they had conducted, what type of poll worker outreach they had tried and had demonstrated to have failed. Was there anything like that, or was it just simply on their say-so, which of course would be a thin reed on which to hang such a drastic reduction in access to polling places?
I don't, no studies were offered to the committee to substantiate the reasons that they offered. That's not to say that they don't have studies that substantiated those reasons. But as far as the committee is concerned, the only thing that they offered the committee as reasons for the reduction was their testimony that these were the factors that precipitated that action.
Okay, and presumably if they had studies, they might have included them with their testimony. I want to ask one more question, and you noted that because of the timing of the settlement, it was not, and here I'm speaking about the settlement with respect to dual registration requirements, breaking up the state registration requirement from the federal registration requirement. That there have been cases on these issues, voting rights cases, in earlier periods, and in particular, there's a Mississippi case. But one of the things that I'm wondering about this is, even though the report did not treat the settlement because of its timing, do you know anything about the terms of the settlement?
I did read over the order. It's a 20-page order that is approving the settlement, so it is a publicly available document. However, I know from as a general idea that the plaintiff in the action, which was LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens of Arizona, appeared to have settled with favorable terms as to them. So what they were seeking was favorable to them. But specifically, I don't know what the terms of the settlement are. I don't know what the walkaway terms are, if the forms that are going to change, or specifically if citizenship is still going to be an issue.
Okay. Well, thank you again for your hard work and your presentation today. It was very informative and certainly adds to our examination of voting access nationwide. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nash, thank you very much for your leadership on the Arizona State Advisory Committee, and thank you to you and to all of the committee members for the work on this report. With that, I think we'll try again with the chair of our main State Advisory Committee, Ms. Keel. See if we can hear you better this time.
Okay, I will try it, and please stop me if you can't.
Terrific, we can hear you well.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, good. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Thank you for inviting me to present highlights from the Maine Advisory Committee's Voting Rights Report and to provide additional information since our report was issued. But first, I'd like to thank our advisor, Barbara DeLavies, who oversees 10 state advisory committees, for her tireless guidance and support. I don't know how she does it, but I do know that we would not be as productive as we are without her. We have a great collaboration. In addition, the committee greatly appreciates the contributions of intern Elizabeth Boyle, who helped with research and drafting sections of this report. The committee is currently working on its project on the criminalization of people with mental illnesses and hopes to have a report ready soon. But when it learned that the commission's statutory report was on voting rights, it saw an opportunity to contribute to the work's headquarters. So we voted to pause our work on that project and pour our energy into supporting the valuable work of the commission. This was particularly timely for two reasons. First, Matt Dunlap, the Maine Secretary of State, was on the Voting Rights Commission formed by President Trump and had filed a lawsuit challenging the openness of that work. That commission has since been disbanded. The documents that Secretary Dunlap sought are now available, and they demonstrate that there is no evidence of voter fraud. Second, there were some attempts, considered blatant by the committee, to suppress the vote in Maine, particularly of students. For these reasons, the committee voted in February to have the briefing and managed to put it together 1 month later in March of this year. It included participation by the Maine Secretary of State and outstanding presentations by the ACLU, the League of Women Voters, and Disability Rights Maine. Not only was the advisory committee able to do the briefing, but it was also able to finish and vote on a report 4 weeks later. Which leads me to the report. Because the commissioners have read the report, I will only highlight some of the important points. First, we learned that Maine has a statutory, regulatory, and community commitment to participation in elections. We have some of the most inclusive and protective voting laws in the country, making Maine one of the most democratic states in the United States. Our residents may register to vote on Election Day. There is no photo ID requirement, and those convicted of crimes are not deprived of their right to vote. Maine serves as a model for the Commission and the rest of the country for recognizing the value of the fundamental right to vote. Moreover, in our June 2018 primary, Maine implemented the first ever statewide ranked choice voting for its gubernatorial and federal candidates. That said, we also learned that despite this commitment to broad participation, there are remarkable but predictable attempts to prevent eligible voters from exercising that important right. While we note in our report that voter suppression takes the form of both legislative and official government action, today I want to focus on suppression by official government action, particularly highlighting what happened in 2016 and 2018 at Bates College, which is located in our second largest city of Lewiston. Through the testimony of Secretary Dunlap, we learned that on the Saturday before the November 2016 presidential election, an anonymous orange flyer was left in several student dorms and in the campus dining hall on the Bates College campus. The flyer, a copy of which the committee obtained, was entitled Bates Election Legal Advisory on bright orange paper and warned that if you choose to register and vote in Lewiston, then you must pay, in bold letters, to change your driver's license to Lewiston within 30 days and pay, bold again, to re-register any vehicle you have in Lewiston and have it inspected. And then, I quote, usually this would be hundreds of dollars in total. Then you may recall in our report at Appendix 2, Secretary Dunlap also provided our committee with a copy of a misleading letter that the mayor of Lewiston had sent out to newly registered voters, primarily students, in February of 2018. What you don't see in the report, but what is included in the briefing transcripts, is testimony that came at the public remarks segment from Bates College student Max Gardner. He came forward to testify about the impact that the mayor's letter had on him and his fellow students, how it confused them, instilled fear of criminal prosecution and of financial penalties, and critically, how it kept students away from the polls. Mr. Gardner's passionate remarks demonstrated how the spreading of false information, particularly when there's little time to clear up misunderstandings so close to an election, had a major negative impact on student voting. This is a perfect example of suppression by official government action. The committee was pleasantly surprised to learn just 2 weeks ago that there's now a bill before the United States Congress that actually refers to the 2016 effort to keep Bates College students away from the polls. This bill would make it a federal crime to knowingly and intentionally spread false information to try to keep people from voting. The penalty included in the bill, submitted by U.S. Senator Claire McCaskill, Democrat from Missouri, for engaging in deceptive acts includes a fine of up to $100,000 and as many as 5 years in prison. The proposal, which is being introduced in both the House and the Senate, calls casting a ballot for one's preferred candidate a fundamental right. The purpose behind this bill is to prohibit and punish any suppression of the vote, including, and I quote, the dissemination of false or misleading information meant to prevent voters from casting their ballots, undermine the electoral process, or intimidate the electorate, end quote. Among the actions that concern the bill's sponsors are any intentional efforts to spread false information about polling places, the time of elections, and the necessity of various forms of identification. Presumably, this law would cover instances like in Maine where voting was made to sound as if it were contingent upon compliance with motor vehicle or other laws. When asked for comments on this proposed federal bill, Maine Secretary Dunlap responded that he's even had reports from students attending another of Maine's campuses, the University of Maine's flagship Orono campus, who were told that they would be jeopardizing their financial aid packages by virtue of registering to vote and changing their residency, which is blatantly false. The legislation is called the Deceptive Practices and Voter Intimidation Prevention Act. In conversations with my fellow committee members, there seems to be consensus that the current bills before Congress that strengthen the integrity of our voting systems and ensure the public confidence in our elections are critical and go to the very reason the Commission on Civil Rights was founded. The committee also believes that the fundamental right to vote should not be impeded or burdened by legislative or any government or private action. Thank you very much for allowing me to report on behalf of the Maine Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Chair Keel. I'll open for questions from my fellow commissioners. While folks are thinking, I'll start off with some of my own. I want to thank you and your committee for your incredibly prolific work in the time that I've been here. So I appreciate your jumping in on this topic because it's valuable to us for the Commission's reporting on voting rights, and also was very grateful to be with you for the briefing that you all held on the criminalization of mental illness, and I look forward to that report as well. From this report, I was really struck. Sure. I was really struck by the contrast between what the report says and what you said about the inclusive state laws in Maine for voters and the explicit racialized threat to voters from the Republican Party chair in recent years, and also the inaccess for persons with disabilities with respect to the right to vote, and the repeat targeting of college students as recently as this year to limit their right to vote. And I wonder if the committee have views about the ways that the inclusive state laws with respect to voting contrast with those very stark limitations on access to franchise for some people in Maine.
Regarding the voter suppression, it seems as though, and which I emphasize, that it happens always on the eve of the election. The week leading up or on the eve, it happens at the last minute where confused students or others can't challenge what's being said. So that's a problem. And we may have all the laws under the sun to protect voters' rights, but when these actions are taken at the last minute, it makes it very difficult to try to educate people and to bring them to the polls, and to, especially with students who are busy and who want to do the right thing, but they're afraid of putting their financial aid in jeopardy, or they're otherwise they're getting in trouble with the law by virtue of voting. So it is very it's a problem that I don't know whether this new federal law might address, but it certainly, it sounds like it's exactly what we need here in Maine. There is great cooperation regarding the disability, the access to the polls. There's a great collaboration between the Disability Rights Maine organization and the Secretary of State's office, and they're trying to break down the physical barriers as well as other barriers related to the training of poll workers that don't realize that persons who have disabilities can come in and bring somebody in to help them, assist them to vote, and don't realize that they cannot ask or challenge somebody based on guardianship status. So there are forces, the that work against these impediments, but it's certainly not perfect.
Thank you. I do also want to just highlight the jaw-dropping nature of the racialized threat that is included in the memo. That this is at page 11 of your memo, and it refers to the 2012 Republican Party chair, who's the chair at the time, noting that there were dozens of Black people who came in and voted on Election Day. And I will say that I found that so striking that I went to look up what had actually happened, because it seemed almost implausible to me. And when I reviewed it in news reports, I learned that it reads as, in fact, worse than you charitably put it in your advisory memorandum. That in fact, the chair went on TV and said that in some parts of rural Maine, there were dozens of Black people who came in and voted on Election Day. And he noted everybody has the right to vote. These are quotes. Everybody has the right to vote, but nobody in town knows anybody that's Black. And that also really struck me. And then I went on to read that he noted that nobody in town knows anybody that's Black, and he was referring to multiple towns. So it's hard to imagine that he actually knows that nobody in town knows whether somebody is or is not Black in multiple towns. He subsequently apologized, which I appreciate, but that is just an astonishing way to frame and otherize people who live in Maine, have the right to vote, and should be able to be respected as voters as recently as this century. So I am sorry it happened. I'm very grateful that your committee reported on it, and I found it stunning. So I will pause there. Commissioner Narasaki.
Thank you for your report. It's refreshing to hear about a state who's actually focusing on trying to make sure that everyone who is eligible to vote actually has an opportunity to cast their vote and is encouraging people to vote. So it sounds like it's wonderful to live in Maine, unless, of course, you're a student.
Or one of those Black people coming over.
Or one of the Black people. One of the experiments that you're doing, I think, is fascinating, which is your foray into ranked choice voting, which is also happening in several cities in California, as a way to try to lessen the political divide and improve the discourse in elections, and hopefully have better results at the end of the day. And I'm wondering how the experiment went, if you happen to have some thoughts about that.
We, as stated in the report, we used it for the June primaries for the gubernatorial and the federal election. And I thought personally that it went quite smoothly. The reaction was, it's kind of strange that you don't have a result on the same day as Election Day. Now we're used to having the results late on the night of an election. But in both instances, with our primary candidate and our federal candidate for U.S. Congress, we had to wait about a week for the results. So first it was announced who got first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. And then when it was realized that the top candidate didn't have a majority of the votes, that is over 50%, then the bottom vote getter was eliminated, and her votes were distributed amongst the remaining candidates and that keeps going until somebody gets the majority of the votes over 50%. So in both cases, our federal candidate and our gubernatorial, we, on the Democrat side, we had to wait about a week. So it was kind of like anticlimactic, but I think that it's worth it for all the reasons that you just mentioned. The state is still working to try to smooth out. We have a clash with the Maine Constitution in that it requires a plurality for a winner in a statewide vote. And that's why this conflicts by saying that it requires a majority. So the goal is to now amend the Constitution so that all elections can use ranked choice voting.
Thank you. Want to see if my fellow commissioners who are on the phone have questions?
Yes, Madam Chair. Wondering if this is Dave Pladney. I was wondering if you could comment or your
Commissioner Cladney, we're having trouble hearing you. Can you speak closer to your phone?
I think Maine to country at those pretty still. Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can.
I can now.
Okay. Thank you. Maine is one of two states, I think, in the country that allows prisoners to vote. And I was wondering if the committee did any work on that, or if you have any information as to how that functions and how much participation there is.
We had testimony from the NAACP of Maine, who goes into the prison and actually has voter registration and voter education drives in the Maine State Prison, as well as the one in Southern Maine. And so that organization, it works in collaboration with the Secretary of State to go in and educate voters. And they, it works very smoothly, and it's something that hopefully will never change. There was an issue this year where apparently the NAACP, however, wasn't able to go into the prison, and that was something that came to the committee's attention after our report, after our briefing, that this year that the NAACP was not allowed to go in and present the program in time for the June primaries, and I think that they're still trying to pursue the going to the prisons before the general election.
Was there a reason given by the administration for that?
It was very vague. What we heard through the grapevine, the committee that is, was that there was new legal staff in the governor's office, and they wanted to explore the issue more. That's all that we know, and it sounds suspect, but hopefully they'll be able to get back in and continue with these programs that have gone on for the last 10 years.
Thank you very much.
It sounded like there may have been another commissioner who also had a question.
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Commissioner Degbele. It's more in the nature of a comment than a question, but I just wanted to underscore that on page 15 of your report, you explain a little bit about how same-day registration has expanded participation and the impact that it's had on Maine's consistently high voter participation levels across the 50 states. And I just think it's noteworthy to underscore that in the last 5 days before the election, your report says, as I read it, that in the 2008 presidential election, almost 56,000 voters registered in that final 5-day period, and in 2010, it was over 19,000 voters that registered in that period. And I just think that those numbers point to ways in which our voting system can be structured to enhance voter participation rather than to put up barriers to participation. So I compliment Maine's example, and I thank you for underscoring it, which is a positive story, even as we face the story about the impediments that are being put in the way of students.
Thank you.
Chair Kill, thank you again for your leadership on the Maine State Advisory Committee and for taking the time to speak with us today and your patience with us because we couldn't hear you the first time. So for coming back, we really appreciate it.
Thank you for your support.
Terrific. So we'll next turn to a discussion and vote on the Commission's report titled Police Use of Force, an Examination of Modern Policing Practices. We'll hold 2 votes. First, we'll consider the report, and second, we'll consider the findings and recommendations. To open the floor for discussion, is there a motion?
Yes, Madam Chair. Commissioner.
Go ahead, Commissioner Cladden.
That's all right. It's been moved.
I'll second that.
Just to make clear that we're moving to approve the report text and that it's been moved by Commissioner Narasaki and seconded by the Vice Chair. Thank you. Commissioner Cladney, as the sponsor of the project, would you like to begin our discussion?
Yes, I would, Madam Chair. I proposed this project in 2014 when police use of force reached a high point in the news. Cases like the shooting of Tamir Rice and John Crawford troubled me then and continue to stand as examples where lives were cut short without justification. I would also like to note that all 8 commissioners on the commission at the time, 7 other commissioners co-sponsored this project. Just before our 2015 briefing, the terrible news of Walter Scott showed lawless police use of force taking a fight that should never have been taken. The attention to these shootings helped to uncover friction between police and communities. It also showed the ways police use of force is not tracked and how officers are not held accountable in these situations where it's called for. I am proud of the briefing we held at the John Jay College School of Criminal Justice in New York City. I would also like to thank the many current and former commission staff who made it happen and those who worked on the report that followed. To name a few, I'd like to thank Merrick Xavier Breyer, Kathleen Cullerton Gonzalez, Maureen Rudolph, and both their teams for excellent research and drafting. I'd especially like to thank Pam Dunstan and Tina Louise Martin for their teams for everything that needed to happen to have us have a difficult field hearing in New York City. It's a hard location to work at. I am very grateful for all the work you do, and I thank the commissioners, special assistants, and interns who all reviewed the report and worked on it to shape the final version on a bipartisan basis. Since the briefing, some unjustified police uses of force have continued despite the national attention on the issue. I believe a great majority of law enforcement officers perform their jobs excellently, even in trying circumstances. I think they are trying to do good. I greatly respect their courage and those who seek to do the right thing by their communities. Unfortunately, as a nation, we still have to ensure constitutional and excellent policing practices for all people. There is a lot that can be done. Our report shows many departments are making progress that should be emulated. It also shows an abdication of responsibility at the federal level to continuing to work with police departments to make these improvements. I thank my fellow commissioners for supporting this project, and I hope the Commission's report and our findings and recommendations help us as a nation make progress on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cladney. To continue the discussion, I offer a few points. First, I thank you, Commissioner Cladney, for your leadership in initiating the project and seeing it through to this point. And I echo your thanks to our staff for their work on this project. Though the project began 3 years ago, it unfortunately remains a timely topic for the Commission to address. In the report text, which has undergone rigorous research and review by numerous staff members as well as commissioners, recognizes ongoing work to improve police practices and, as an important addition, can serve as a foundation for necessary further reform. I hope in particular the Department of Justice will heed the calls in this report for its involvement in developing best practices and working with police departments around the country to ensure constitutional policing so all persons involved in police interactions, police officers, and the communities they serve may remain safe. Is there any other discussion or amendments for this report? Commissioner Narasaki?
Yes, Madam Chair, I would very much like to add my appreciation to Commissioner Cladney and his wonderful special assistant for their leadership in working with staff to shepherd this report through. It has been a long time that we have been working on it, and it's sad that it's still extremely timely, even though the hearing was in 2015. I do want to also acknowledge that we had many state advisory committees who also had hearings on the topic, and want to thank the regional staff and those committees for their contributions, which were very important to keeping the report very current. So thank you.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question, take a roll call vote. Just want to be very clear that what we're voting on is the version of the report, including some supplemental edits as circulated by Commissioner Cladney, Special Assistant, yesterday. So moving forward, Commissioner Degbele, how do you vote?
Recuse.
Commissioner Harriet?
I'm going to vote no.
Commissioner Kirsanow?
No.
Commissioner Cladney?
Yes.
Commissioner Narasaki?
Yes.
Commissioner Yaki?
Aye.
Vice Chair Timmons Goodson?
Yes.
And I vote yes. The motion passes. 1 commissioner is recused, 2 commissioners opposed, no commissioner abstained, all others were in favor. Next, we will consider the findings and recommendations for the report. To open the floor for discussion, is there a motion?
Madam Chair, Dave again, I would move that we approve the final version of the findings and recommendations, which all the commissioners, I believe, received yesterday.
Thank you. Is there a
which
second?
had minor edits in it.
Sorry. Thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you.
No.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question, take a roll call vote. Commissioner Degbele, how do you vote?
Recused.
Thank you. Commissioner Harriet?
I vote no.
Commissioner Kirsanow?
No.
Commissioner Cladney?
Yes.
Commissioner Narasaki?
Yes.
Commissioner Yaki?
Aye.
Vice Chair Timmons Goodson?
Yes.
And I vote yes. The motion passes. 1 commissioner is recused, 2 commissioners voted no, no commissioner abstained, and all others were in favor. I'll note that with the adoption of the report and the findings and recommendations, the clock begins ticking with respect to deadlines for statements and rebuttals. The deadline for statements will be Monday, September 17, and the deadline for rebuttals will be Wednesday, October 17. If a commissioner intends to file a SIR rebuttal, notice will need to be given by Wednesday, October 24, and the SIR rebuttal will be due on Wednesday, October 31. The next item is a discussion and vote on the Commission's report titled Contemporary Civil Rights Challenges, A View from the States, 2018 Survey of the State Advisory Committees to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. To open the floor for discussion, I move for approval of the report text as circulated by my special assistant on Thursday, August 9, 2018, subject to any editorial or typographical changes necessary for publication. Is there a second?
I second it, This is the Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. To begin discussion, I offer a few points. First, I thank our staff, especially Sarah Lee Sewell, as well as Catherine Culleton Gonzalez and Maureen Rudolph for moving this project forward. The Commission is uniquely strengthened by our capacity to benefit from the expertise of the advisory committees we have in all 50 states, plus the District of Columbia. The survey reported in this publication was a valuable opportunity to hear from members of all committees about the issues they thought most important in their states, as well as the issues they thought we at the Commission should take up in our nationwide assessments. I am so very grateful to the State Advisory Committee members who took the time to complete the survey, and I know my work on this Commission already is richer for benefiting from the views the survey report describes. I look forward to a wider public also benefiting from the expertise the survey captures once the report is public. Is there any other discussion or amendments for this report? Hearing none, I'll call the question, take a roll call vote. Commissioner Degbele, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Harriet?
I'm going to abstain on this one.
Commissioner Kursnow,
Yes.
Commissioner Gladney,
Yes.
Commissioner Narasaki,
Yes.
Commissioner Yaki,
Aye.
Vice Chair Timmons Goodson,
Yes.
and I vote yes. The motion passes. One commissioner abstained, no commissioner opposed. All others were in favor. Thank you all. I'll note that all commissioners agreed to forego individual statements on this report, and so we will move to immediate electronic publication of this report in the coming days. So we will now discuss and vote on the schedule for business meetings in 2019. Everyone should have a proposed list of dates for meetings next year, which I will read out loud now. January 25, February 22, March 22, April 12, May 17, June 7, July 19, August 16, September 13, October 18, November 15, and December 6. To open the floor for discussion, I move to approve the schedule as previously circulated and read out loud now. Do I have a second?
I second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Commissioner Arasaki?
Yes, Madam Chair. As I've noted to staff, I do have afternoon conflicts for the June, July, and August meetings. As long as they are business meetings and not all-day hearings, I can make those dates work.
Thank you. So unless there's further discussion, I'll call the question, take a roll call vote. Commissioner Degbole, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Harriet?
Aye.
Commissioner Kursnow?
Yes.
Commissioner Gladney?
Yes.
Commissioner Narasaki?
Yes.
Commissioner Yaki?
Aye.
Vice Chair Timmons Goodson?
Yes.
And I vote yes. The motion passes unanimously. Next, we'll discuss and vote on the nominated chair of the Commission's Oregon Advisory Committee. Before we begin discussion, I remind my fellow commissioners that the Commission has a policy not to defame, degrade, or incriminate any person. Each of these individuals has agreed to volunteer time and energy in the pursuit of the protection of civil rights. The staff director has recommended for appointment Thompson Fowler as chair of the Oregon State Advisory Committee. To open the floor for discussion, I move that we approve this appointment. Do I have a second?
Madam Chair, I'll second.
Thank you. That was Commissioner Gladney. Any discussion of this appointment? Okay, I'll call the question and take a roll call vote. Commissioner Degbole, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Harriet?
Aye.
Commissioner Kursnow?
Yes.
Commissioner Gladney?
Yes.
Commissioner Narasaki?
Yes.
Commissioner Yaki?
Aye.
Vice Chair Timmons Goodson?
Yes.
And I vote yes. The motion passes unanimously. The next item on our amended agenda is to discuss and vote on the release of the Commission's report, Stand Your Ground. To open the floor for discussion, do we have a motion?
I have a motion.
Go ahead, Commissioner Yaki.
Yeah, I move to release this report as a transcript of our hearing in Orlando and only with the commissioner's statements to accompany it.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you. To begin discussion, I offer a few points. This project stems from a briefing that the Commission held in 2014. It was and continues to be an important topic for civil rights evaluation. Very recent news reports suggest stand your ground laws are used and can be used in ways that are deeply troubling, and there is evidence to suggest racial discrimination. Unfortunately, our record from our investigation is dated, and I understand the data collected for the report is insufficient to address the scope of the investigation, separate and apart from the age of the data. The staff who worked on this report no longer work at the Commission. I am proud and grateful that our staff have made tremendous strides, even in challenging budgetary times, in moving through the backlog of Commission reports that existed when I joined the Commission. Whereas when I joined the Commission a year and a half ago, we had 13 reports pending, and we voted to add 5 more topics, rounding our total to 18 pending reports. Following publication of reports from our earlier votes today, before this one, now we will have 8 reports pending. I am deeply grateful to the Commission staff for their hard work to press our mission forward, and to my fellow commissioners for committing our time and expertise to sharing our views on these critically important civil rights topics. And I look forward to the publication of the remaining reports on our agenda, in addition to adding to that important body of work. For this Stand Your Ground project, I am told we effectively would need to restart the investigation before we could offer considered commission judgment and reporting. Commissioner Degbele and I were not commission members at the time of this investigation, and I understand Commissioner Cladney was not present for its briefing. Facing the difficult circumstance of insufficient data to offer current analysis and a need to restart an investigation before having an opportunity to deliver that analysis, I support this motion to release the report as transcript only, with commissioner statements as a way to share the information the Commission has taken in on this crucial topic and offer an opportunity for commissioners to share views based on the record we have. Is there any further discussion? Commissioner Harriet?
Yeah. I object to publishing this report without the empirical research that we did undertake. The fact that it was insufficient to prove the null hypothesis does not mean that it's not useful. In fact, I think what's happened here is that members of the Commission are unhappy with what the data show. And it's important that what we have be part of the report. I also am assuming that, given that this means that we have 3 outstanding reports, that if we're going to do statements, they need to be timed so that they can be given our attention. So while I object to the report, I would intend to write a statement, and I would like the schedule for that to take us beyond the 2 reports that we already have statements pending. I mean, right now we're working on our rebuttals for the voting rights report, and that's overlapping with the police practices report. And I think we can handle that, but I don't think we can handle throwing another set of statements on top of it.
Commissioner Harriet, I think that's fair, and the plan is to stagger time for statements so that there'll be time for this as well. Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, I'll call the question, take a roll call vote. Commissioner Degbele, how do you vote?
Abstain.
Commissioner Harriet?
I vote no.
Commissioner Kirsenow?
No.
Commissioner Cladney?
Yes.
Commissioner Narasaki?
Yes.
Commissioner Yaki?
Aye.
Vice Chair Timmons-Goodson?
Yes.
And I vote yes. The motion passes. 2 commissioners opposed, 1 commissioner abstained, all others were in favor. I'll note that with this vote, the clock begins ticking with respect to deadlines for statements and rebuttals, as Commissioner Harriet has raised. Because we also approved today the Commission's report on police practices, we will stagger the deadlines for statements, rebuttals, and surrebuttals. The deadline for statements will therefore be Monday, October 1, and the deadline—
That's not much of a stagger.
It gives us 2 additional weeks.
Oh, that's not enough. I mean, that's just silly.
Well, this is the current plan, but we can discuss it if we need to come up with an additional plan that will work.
I mean, I can't possibly work on three things at the same time. This is a fairly complicated thing. We need to string it out longer than that.
Okay, so why don't we have discussion? I'll tell you the dates that we have currently discussed, and I understood your special assistant to have agreed to, but we can.
I'm the one that writes the statements.
Wonderful. Then we can find additional time and think about what will work. But the current plan was that the statements will be Monday, October 1. The deadline for rebuttals would be Thursday, November 1. And if a commissioner intended to file a surrebuttal, notice will need to be given by Thursday, November 8, and the surrebuttal will be due Thursday, November 15. If we need to work on a schedule that better accommodates Commissioner Harriet's schedule, I'm happy to hear what that schedule can look like.
Well, why don't we just take out, what I really need is time for the initial statement. And so the October date is the one that is the biggest problem. I think I can probably do rebuttal faster than 30 days. And I doubt surrebuttal is going to be needed. I mean, I've never done a surrebuttal. What I really need is run this by October 31st, rebuttals, 2 weeks after that. So.
Does any commissioner have concern with modifying the schedule that way, or have concern with deciding this at this moment?
Better to do it now than later.
I support Commissioner Harriet's request for an extension. My understanding is we are also hopeful to get another report ready for vote this fall, and so that will add to the challenge, and so I am supportive.
Any other commissioners with views or concerns?
Is there a particular date you want to get this done by? Is there a drop dead date anywhere?
I don't think so. I have no objection. I want to make sure that what we're talking about works for other schedules. Hearing no concern. So then what we're discussing is deadline October 31.
Yeah, but I don't know what day of the week that is. I just made that up.
That is find outable. So October 31 is a Wednesday. Then the deadline for rebuttals would be 2 weeks following that, which would be November 14.
Yeah.
And
so rebuttals a week later, but again,
so rebuttals a week later takes us into Thanksgiving, which is not an issue for me, but just making sure people are clear about that. Okay. That is our current plan. While we're on that topic, I think we had an issue about rebuttals for another report coming and a deadline for that. Having reached this agreement that we likely don't need the rebuttals for the Stand Your Ground report, are we in a position to expect that we likely don't need rebuttals for the report on Native American civil rights?
Can't tell you.
Okay. Our next item on our agenda is to hear from the Staff Director, Mauro Morales, for our monthly Staff Director's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since there's a 13-hour time difference where I currently am in D.C., I will defer any of my... I am in Tokyo, Japan at the moment.
Cool.
I will defer any discussion. Of course, if the Commissioner has any questions, I will be in the office on Monday and available to speak with you. So I thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Staff Director. Hope you get some sleep and appreciate your calling in from Tokyo. Nothing further. I hereby adjourn.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Commissioner Osaki.
So, Madam Chair, you earlier talked about the amazing work that our office, I never know what it stands for, OCRE, our research office, has done to help us really get ahead of and start to clear the backlog significantly. And I also want to note the performance and productivity of our state advisory committees. Now that they are full in terms of having actual people in the committees, it has been a challenge for staff because we haven't been able to increase the number of staff. And so they are carrying a much heavier load. But I do want to note the productivity and the value that the reports on the state level have contributed to our own commission report. So I just want to add that thank you to the leadership of David Musat, the regional staff, and of course our staff director, who has been moving all of these pieces with very limited resources.
Very much echo that gratitude. It's really exciting to be able to see the enormous productivity from the state advisory committees and to benefit from that expertise. Thank you. Okay, with that, I hereby adjourn our meeting at 11:15 a.m. Eastern Time. Thank you.